Hello friends. Part of what we do here is review cameras, lenses, and other photography gear. We're selective, and when Nikon announced the Zfc Z-mount camera, Raymond and I knew that we would have to get our grubby mittens on it. Years ago, we reviewed the Nikon DF, a similarly modern vintage interchangeable lens camera, and now some of that DNA has come to the Z-mount in the form of this little beauty. Today, a lot of you have been asking for it. I've got Raymond here to share his thoughts on camera. He and I are both going to give you our impressions and opinions of the Zfc after a week-long rental and about 400 images. Normally, we spend a little bit more time with the camera for a review, and we may spend some time again with this little guy in the near future, but we wanted to get the conversation started, tell you how it worked for us, and help you decide if this may be the modern mirrorless camera for you. In case you're new here, hello, my name is Leigh. You will see my partner Raymond as well from time to time, like you will in this video. For over a decade, we've been sharing videos every week on anything where you might have a camera in your hand, from gear reviews to how to use that gear, technique, inspiration. I even have complete courses on different photography topics if you want to go in depth with me. I would love it if you would subscribe, and there is also a link in the description to learn more about channel membership if you are curious about those courses and everything else that members receive. Okay, onto the Zfc. We have used every single Z-mount camera. Z7 and Z7 II, Z6 and Z6 II, Z5 and Z50, and now the Zfc. One thing we love about the Z-mount bodies is whether you're talking the flagship Z7 II or the bottom rung Z50, they're actually quite similar in usage and performance. Raymond once infamously declared that the Z50 is actually superior to the Z7. You can form your own judgment on that, but the mere fact that his opinion makes sense is a compliment to the Z system. In fact, whether it's Nikon, Sony, Fujifilm, Leica, Panasonic, Hasselblad, Canon, or others, and whether it's entry-level, mid-range, or flagship, here in 2021, there is simply not a bad camera on the market. More than ever, we are seeing the manufacturers bring their best foot forward up and down the product line. And this holds quite true with the Zfc. For starters, it's hard not to notice the aesthetics of this body. It is a throwback to simpler times for sure, and bears more than a passing resemblance to the insanely popular Fujifilm cameras from the past decade up through today. The Zfc is not a Fujifilm clone. In fact, Raymond is going to deep dive on a significant difference in a few moments, but you'd not be wrong to be interested in those DNA differences between the Zfc and the Fujifilm X system cameras. And if you're a Nikon user who has been pining for a Fuji camera, the Zfc may very well scratch that itch. You've got dials for miles on top of the camera, an ISO dial integrated with the PASM plus auto lever, shutter speed dial integrated with a stills and video lever, and exposure compensation, plus a nice aperture readout. All of this works together to give the Nikon mirrorless shooter a very similar look and feel to film cameras dating back 50 years or more, with some DNA sprinkled in from various generations of those classic F-mount bodies. I do want to mention early on here that this is a sub $1,000 body here in the US. This is not the same price point and overall robustness as the similar in appearance Fujifilm flagship APS-C bodies like the X-T4 or the X Pro 3. While they share the APS-C sensor size and basic design philosophy, I would be more inclined to put the heftier Fujifilm bodies up against the full-frame Z7 II or Z6 series. That's not a knock on the Zfc. It is what it is designed to be, a budget mirrorless interchangeable lens body sharing a surprising level of performance and features with its bigger brothers and sisters in the system. In fact, the story on the imaging performance of the camera is much the same as every other Z body. Excellent color and image rendition in a high-performing package that leaves us wanting very little in terms of performance. There's things that we think could be better, such as the subject tracking interface and performance, but that's true of every other Z camera. This shows us, once again, that Nikon is willing to put the same, or at least quite similar, level of performance in this camera as their more expensive Z offerings. This leads us to that ongoing topic of having choices, with many performance features being equal or similar. Do you want the highest performing, highest pixel count Z camera? Go for the Z7 II. An all-arounder? Z6 II. Mid-range at a lower price? Z5. Best bang for the buck? Z50. Something more mindful that may slow you down a bit and draw you in to your photography? The Zfc. In terms of features, the Z cameras are all in a pretty narrow band from a practical photography standpoint, and that narrow band is a very good one. You can't go wrong with any of these cameras. I do want to note that we did not rent the camera with the kit lens. There is a stylized version of the APS-C 16 to 50mm lens that we previously owned with our Z50. Notable regarding this lens is the compactness and that it does have optical image stabilization. This is important to many users because the Zfc, like the Z50, does not have in-body image stabilization. This makes the Zfc and that cute kit lens a good team for casual photography. However, in lieu of the kit lens, we used the Zfc primarily with the 14 to 30mm f4S lens, the 35mm f1.8S lens, the 50mm f2.8 MCZ lens, which we've borrowed from Nikon, and also the 200 to 500mm f-mount super telephoto with the FTZ adapter. All worked great with this camera, and our love affair with the absolutely stellar 35mm f1.8 has been reignited. And we're similarly impressed with the 50mm f2.8 macro, which we will soon be publishing a review of. Before I share any more, let's go over to Raymond, who wants to share 2 key points from his usage and impressions of the camera.
The Zfc is a neat camera. It's small, lightweight, and like Leigh has already expressed, it definitely will take you back to simpler times, while offering everything that the Nikon Z cameras truly deliver on. I am going to nitpick just a couple of aspects of the camera, but it's out of love, I promise. And I do like that this camera exists, and I hope it's the start of things to come. One thing that I do like about similar looking Fujifilm cameras, like our X100V and other Fujifilm cameras we've reviewed, is that they don't have a PASM dial or lever. On a Fujifilm, if you want aperture priority, you set the shutter speed dial to A, then just move the aperture. If you want shutter priority, you set the aperture to A and change the shutter speed dial manually. If you want to shoot the equivalent of M mode, you simply change both the aperture and the shutter speed manually. Based on your behaviors with the camera, you're telling it which mode you want. Finally, if you want P or program mode, you set both the shutter speed and aperture to A. With Fujifilm, you sort of back into the PASM settings with the process of elimination. If you shot older film cameras with 1980s technology, this might be second nature to you. And the same holds true with ISO. On Fuji, you can set A on ISO right on the dial, and you can add or remove auto ISO from the mix also by setting ISO manually or over to A. With the Zfc, you do have the PASM lever, and you also have the dials. To me, this can make things more confusing. For example, if I set the camera to aperture priority, but then I start changing the shutter speed dial, nothing happens. This means I have an extra thing to think about when I set the shutter speed. I need to stop and consider where I've got the PASM dial set. Also, the Zfc has no A setting on the ISO dial. Frustrating for me. You would engage auto ISO through the menu, once again creating some confusion because you also have the ISO dial on top of the camera. So I need to stop and think about how I have a menu setting set before I touch the ISO dial. Now, I'm not saying that either Fujifilm's approach or Nikon's are right or wrong, but once I've gotten comfortable using Fujifilm without looking, it's an adjustment to go to Nikon's way of thinking. I think Nikon is riding the middle. They want to appeal to users of older cameras while keeping things progressive. And it's not like I'm demanding that things always be the way that they used to be. But again, when you've got the Fujifilm thinking nailed down, which is very much in line with those older film cameras, it can lead to small moments of confusion when using the Nikon. Second point, Fujifilm has committed to their film simulations up and down the X system. And you can extend that with the excellent film recipes from Richie over at Fuji X Weekly. Check that out if you haven't. Nikon has picture controls and special effects modes. They definitely alter the appearance of the image, but there's something magical on the Fuji side when it comes to dialing in specific film stock effects. I think there's opportunity for Nikon and others when releasing these modern vintage mirrorless cameras to have licensed film names that bring those characteristic looks to your images. This truly is one reason why, if we had both a ZFC and a Fujifilm camera, we would tend to pick up the Fujifilm. Obviously, this is a personal preference, but the way I see it, if you're going to give me the throwback body, give me the throwback look also, down to the film stock level. Again, overall, I love the camera like every other Z camera. It simply delivers Nikon's look, diversity of controls and settings, and the results always look as we'd want, with a user experience designed to appeal to all skill levels.
Thank you, Raymond. He and I don't always agree, or we do agree, but not with the same intensity on a topic. In this case, regarding the PASM lever's presence, I'm neutral. I very much understand Raymond's point, and I'm glad that he highlighted the difference between this camera and the Fuji X philosophy. It's an important point if you're thinking Fuji clone when you see this camera, because it is something that makes hands-on use of the two brands very different. But I also know from talking to viewers that a lot of folks out there like to have the PASM dial. And if you've seen any of my videos where I've used Fujifilm cameras, you know that I love film simulations, especially out of the box. And that is a part of what makes the Fujifilm offerings quite special in my eyes. For any of you coming from the Nikon DF who may be interested in this beauty, note that the ZFC does have wonderful 4K video, while the DF did not have video options at all. It is an APS-C sensor, while the DF is full frame, and of course the DF was a native F-mount DSLR camera, while the ZFC is natively Z-mount mirrorless body. And while compatible with the FTZ adapter, it is not going to autofocus with older Nikon AF and AFD lenses, while the DF will without hesitation. Okay, let's bring this home with a summary. This is a have it your way camera, both in terms of how it stands out from the other Z cameras with its design, but it's also user-friendly in the sense that you can work exclusively within the buttons and dials with the rear LCD tucked away, or you can set it to program mode or auto and fire away to your heart's content. Having this camera's design aesthetic, even when shooting it with automated settings, still can keep that love of photography going. Not every shot needs to involve the photographer setting everything manually, but it sure is nice to have that option and that physical sensation when it is that time. If you want the best, fastest, meanest, and baddest Nikon of 2021, you're probably already looking at the Z6 II or Z7 II. If you want the cheapest, we've seen the Z50 body advertised in the US in the $600 range. But if you want something that looks amazing and you want to appreciate the actual design of the camera itself, you want it to scratch that vintage itch, but you also want it to deliver on performance and quality at a relatively low price, something that will make photography fun for you, the ZFC is definitely worth your consideration. We are down to one Z body in our own collection. That Z7 gets a lot of use because I film nearly all of my studio videos with it, but there have been some spirited discussions with Raymond and I about potentially adding the ZFC to our collection. I don't think we will because we've been so focused on our L-mount bodies, but we also said we don't think we will about the Leica Q2, the Nikon F6, the Leica SL2, and honestly, just about everything else back there at one time or another. So I'm going to put my head back in the sand and stop thinking about it for a while. Also, we are big fans of the new Nikon 28mm SE vintage styled prime lens that looks like a brilliant companion to the ZFC, and we're hoping to try that out very soon, maybe on a ZFC, so more to come on that. But how about you? Is the ZFC already your Nikon, or have you been considering it? Let us know in the comments. Please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, there is a link in the description of this video if you want to learn more about channel membership. And thank you for watching.